Hans, thank you so very much for your willingness and generosity to talk. And I would like to talk about the global contemporary art world after 1989. A very, very important exhibition that closed just recently, I believe, just 1 month ago.
Yeah.
And it's something that we have in common when you think of the project Global Contemporary and Former West. It's to looking back into the period of last 2 decades, looking at the year 1989 as a crucial year that probably, I dare to say, changed the DNA of the world, and with it the DNA of the art world. When we started to, within the platform of the project Former West, when we started to think as to what is it that we need to do, it was 4 or 5 years ago. It was in a situation when here in the West, you would say 1989, most people would not even react, would not even recognize the year as something really important. It has changed in the meantime, quite radically. But also, if it is recognized, it's recognized as a year that means something over there, far away. In Eastern Europe, communism fell, and in Berlin, the wall fell. So it's not necessarily recognized as something that influenced the fabric of the so-called West, and therefore our kind of instrument called Former West. However, in the beginning of our project, we thought what would be paramount to do is to make a summary of last 20 years, make a survey exhibition to get to understand what is it that really happened in last 20 years. And more, deeper and deeper we went into the research, we were realizing this is something we are not capable to do. And there comes your project.
Very wise.
I like. There comes your project. We traveled to ZKM, totally excited. And there is an exhibition that you refer to as the first summary of last 20 years in your text. And I wonder, you already reacted. You said it's wise decision, but how did you experience it? And as another help to this question or point of reference is the discussion at the opening of the exhibition, where I intervened into the discussion because everybody at the panel thought the exhibition failed to resolve something that they had in mind. And I was like, what do we expect of an exhibition? We have to be quite careful to understand what an exhibition can do at this very point of history. So back to this question of the first summary. How did you experience it? And how do you feel you achieved that summary of last 20 years?
I have no clear idea, because I know that there was a big controversy as whether such an exhibition was necessary and was telling something. Contemporary is, of course, such a familiar notion that many people thought nothing has changed, ever. We are still in the plain modern time where contemporary is taken for granted. Therefore, we introduced, of course, the decisive year 89, which also plays such an important, rightly, plays such an important part in the Former West. Former West I liked very much because the former is, the West still exists, but it is the former West.
It's not the end of the West, but it's
not
former.
The end of the West, it's the former West. And also that is former modernism. When the MoMA opened 7 years ago, I gave a lecture at a symposium with the title, When Was Modern Art?
Ah, that's a challenge.
Yeah, so the problem was to coin a new meaning of the term contemporary, especially so since in one of those Biennale pavilions, the German performance made fun of the term.
Justino Segal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so everybody thinks this is something so fashionable. But the problem with terms, I'm very interested in terms and terminology and notions, is that it means for different people something entirely different. So the ones who always are in the game think contemporary is just a last sigh of what's going on forever. And the others regard it as an entry. So the German audience was reluctant, and therefore we knew this, and therefore we did this documentation of
the histories room.
Yeah, what we called art worlds, not art, but art worlds, in the Danto sense, that this is the art worlds. Art, for him, it was the art world, the Western art world, who decided how to deal with art. But we wanted to show that in the last 20 years, new art worlds came into being, and that mapping the art worlds became a big concern for biennials.
Biennial as a iconographic resource of global worlds? How do you see biennials?
To establish a new art geography. For instance, Asia-Pacific art in the 90s was a new attempt to position Australia in an Asian context, no longer in a Western context.
Mm-hmm.
So the big change occurred between 88 and 93. In Australia, for instance, in 88, the biennial was called World Art, 1940 to 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the next event, the triennial, did no longer speak about world art, but talked about global art. And I like such things, such shifts of terminology. Nobody talked of global art before. So we had a timeline for the year 89, and 89 was for us instrumental for the German audience to show that we are not only speaking about a fashionable term,
mm-hmm.
but about history. But the most difficult history of all, the history of the contemporary, which is a paradoxical subject.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a paradox, but it's becoming a new, it is a fashion to some extent, but you see departments of history of contemporary art being open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that paradox is being played out nonetheless.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with history of contemporary art? When does it start? We should be able to identify, when does the contemporary begin?
Well, the contemporary was always there. This is a problem.
Yeah.
Because it's such a familiar term. Art had to be always contemporary in modern times. But now the contemporary means the entry of other people in the game who have made their first entry.
So you would locate it to 89?
Yes, I would. I mean, approximately it was prepared for at least 10 years before. Mm-hmm. And the opposition against something where world art was last time exhibited in a modern sense in the MoMA in 84, the opposition against this tribal art, modern art, was a great motor to stir up new energies.
Mm-hmm. What were other exhibitions at that year that were of crucial importance?
In 89?
Mm-hmm, around the time.
Well, of course, the Magicien, which is also a paradox, because everybody agreed that it failed, but everybody dates a new era from then on. In London, Rashid Arain had his exhibition, The Other Modernity, in the neglected modernity. Mm-hmm. In Beijing, the avant-garde exhibition was closed by France, and after that, art made a big reorientation. So when the first international Chinese exhibition, which traveled also to the US, opened in 93 in Hong Kong, they called it Post-89.
Really? I'm not aware of this show. In 1993, Hong Kong, Post-89.
And this was a very big project with many artists, and so there was a gallerist, there was Oscar Ho from Hong Kong, and they just said Chinese art after 89.
That's remarkable.
And this traveled as the first comprehensive Chinese exhibition. So there is a lot of things happening around the time. And of course, exhibitions are exhibitions, but they can also be markers of time. Mark of time in that they distinguish the time before from that after. So, for instance, the magicien would hardly be possible many years before. And after that was no longer possible in the way it was done. So there was a different mentality. For instance, the magicien show was traditional in that it juxtaposed Western professional artists with, so to speak, authentic tribal artists, without really paying attention to the fact that there were already for a long time African video people and so on and so on. So it was a start, but a start which had its mark of time. So it could not have been 10 years later. It would have been impossible.
Impossible.
And this is interesting too. There is a project in England which is dedicated to the history of exhibitions, exhibition history. And so the exhibition history plays a great part in the so-called global contemporary.
You refer to the project of After All?
Yes.
The publications?
Yes.
Right. The most recent book is, I believe, on the Havana Biennale.
Yes, right.
Important.
But if you think that in 81 there was this big survey of the former West, this big survey in Cologne, and it was called Westkunst. Full stop. Westkunst, 1939 to the present. There was not even the hesitation not to represent the art of these 5 decennies other than by Western artists. Nobody had the idea that it could be done.
Exactly.
So this was the former West in its full confidence, self-confidence.
You refer to Westkunst's exhibition in your text, and you suggest that this was last point possible, no?
Yes. Exactly like also the MoMA exhibition, affinity between tribal and modern art. Yeah. So we all know this very well. This is a history of the former West, and now I think the present West is still not very much decided what to do with the new situation.
Because it has this inclination to domination.
It has, and it loses a little bit. It has to give up a little bit of its identity. So there are now new strategies of inviting shows of single artists from India and China, and that is it. We just enlarge our exhibition practice, and then we will be a different West. But I guess the development of the present West is a very interesting subject, which we also touched yesterday evening in the discussion. In that sense, I say the present, so to speak, situation of the West is no longer to aspire to be universal, to be alone on the globe, but to discover eventually that we are also dealing with a local culture which calls itself universal. I mean, to put it, you know. But this is not yet ready. I mean, maybe most people will vividly interdict and protest. But this is something, for instance, you just look at the museums. There is still the vision that I can globalize Western museums in the collections, which I think it's impossible, but it's not necessary. So the Western Museum can become Western in a new sense. So yesterday evening I said, this is just, we have to present ourselves, to present our culture in a different way in the face of the global audience. So we just have to represent ourselves in a different way, and to also explain, to offer a new narration.
So it's in correspondence with the idea of re-provincializing Europe, right?
Exactly.
So we need to understand we are nothing but one province of the world.
Yes, but re-provincializing has already a kind of bad overtone, you know. nobody wants to become province or provincial. But it's what I call local and you call provincial. And provincial is the same thing. I think this will be a new conscience, a new operation. I mean, I don't know how to phrase it, but I think this will last a good time before the West is ready. If you think that the Westkunst, to return again to 81, meant that it was modern art including the US. I mean, something so obvious that we can hardly believe that there was an issue at the time. To say not only modern art, but Westkunst means Europe plus the US. So, this is fantastic how terminology, how thinking changes.
Exactly, yeah.
And we only can say it has begun to change, and it has changed rapidly in many parts of the world. I wonder how it will change in the so-called West, the present West.
Yeah, that's a huge question. We
Yeah.
don't know how to answer.
So when we talk about contemporary art, which was the beginning of our conversation, the question which arrives immediately is who is speaking of modern art? Not what is modern art, but who is speaking of modern art. Where it is a talker. So one of our conference had the title, Where is Art Contemporary? And there was a mistake by the printer. Where is contemporary art?
Lovely.
Which we, yeah, it was.
It's very good.
So, no, we had, where is art contemporary in our sense? And what happens now in the West, which also played a part in our discussions last night, was that anthropologists and art critics or curators are somehow pushed close together from different regions. Because also the anthropologists can no longer exhibit the masks from the bush in Africa, tribal objects, artifacts. You know, the famous question, 88 in New York, art artifact, also a kind of old-fashioned question nowadays.
Exactly.
Yeah, but at that time it was, so I think that is exciting. We had several conferences called Global Studies with PhD candidates from different disciplines, and it soon became evident that the anthropologists and the art historians talked about the same thing, but in a very different way. And this is for me encouraging now. There is something changing.
But even they use comparable methods, right? When you, for
Yes.
example, think about filmed interviews.
Yes,
because
yes,
we are
yes,
having
yes,
one.
yes,
It's
yes,
quite fascinating
yes.
to see.
But when they describe video artists from Ghana, then of course the anthropologists are better equipped to interpret art as social practice than the art historians or art critics, who think this is an exhibition matter. And it is so. It was fantastic in these two conferences to see how the participants differed among each other in approaching the same thing, which is necessary in my way. But it had hardly began.
Wow. Now you mentioned that museums in the West should not, or it's a strange ambition to try to build collections that would have an ambition to be global, that would pretend to be global, and I absolutely understand. And that's why I'd like to return to the Global Contemporary as an exhibition, because you made such an attempt, and I wonder what your methodology was, because when I mentioned our fear of doing such exhibition, we simply didn't know where to start, how to do it. How do you make a survey of what's happened in the world over the last 20 years?
Yes, we didn't know either, but we took the courage to discuss among each other thematic units, like world time, the world as transit zone, or picture worlds like Nollywood, and real worlds, how picture worlds are traveling and crossing real worlds. then lost in translation was a section on new biographies of contemporary artists who already make their own career across different cultures, the subject of their works. So we were looking out for new topics, but we did not look for a global style, not at all, because it doesn't exist. So I said global is a condition of art.
All right, this is very important what you say, because I remember somewhere mid-1990s or towards the end of 1990s, there was this label that suddenly appeared, and I think authored by Robert Fleck around Manifesta 2 in Luxembourg, who launched the term international style. Trying to, of course, Manifesta is European Biennial of Contemporary Art, so it was really related to this East-West relation within Europe.
Yes.
And it created enormous uproar. This kind of idea that there are no differences anywhere, that there's one label called international style, was something relatively problematic, but also functioned as a catalyst of certain conversations that were crucial. But you would say that something like global style is not possible to identify.
Well, I would like to return for a moment to international style. Now, international for me is a perfect term to characterize modern art at modern times, because it was based on the safe existence of nations who communicate with each other on an international scale.
It's really international.
So modern art was always international, but existed in nations. And Paris was, of course, the symbolic place for international Europe. And so, for instance, Hitler raged against modern art because it was international and not racist and not German. So international was something absolutely important before the 90s approach to characterize what distinguished modern art as an art which did not only exist within nations, because the attraction of Paris and later New York, that was, so to speak, in a time when nations were not yet in doubt and in crisis, but international. So today we could talk about transnational, maybe. I mean,
maybe extranational.
Or extranational. The international has lost its perfume, I mean, which it had. And of course, terms are terms, and notions are notions. So, but we can try to use, very cautiously some notions in order to indicate that we talk differently about the same thing, about art.
Right. So back to the method, did you have advisors? Did you travel to every single corner of the globe?
Well, we had an advisory committee, and this was a certain help. Then we prepared the exhibition by platforms in Sao Paulo, New Delhi, Hong Kong, and Beijing. So, and we did at all these places the same thing. We we arrived, and explained what we were doing in Karlsruhe. And then said, what do you think about it? Is this a subject or not? And then there was a wild local discussion. But it was, in all these places, we were received with open arms, because they said, finally, this is made a topic, and you are generous, you come and ask us, ask our advice, instead of coming and telling us.
Pointing the works,
you have to do this. So, I mean, some US Americans are today, across the world, very unpopular, because they write global art history. It's again something hegemonic.
The story of domination continues.
Domination is domination, or missionarizing the world. So this was for us encouraging, and we found out that the topic globalization for many places we visited offered access to a participation, what we call it. Which was welcomed, but which was also discussed as a necessity for rethinking themselves. So this was very helpful for getting along with or getting forward with the project.
Mm-hmm. But globalization in this exhibition was not really a theme. There was not a topic, was it?
No, we said this cannot be a topic. This is too large. We have to discuss what kinds of topics appear with globalization.
Okay, and that's why you divided it into these various sections.
So it was very complicated because we could not really press certain artists in a certain category. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the categories had to be a little bit shifted to allow the artist positions also to enter. And we had a fluid transition between the different sections. But we were very pleased at the end to discuss also the frontiers of the art concept and such things. The ethnographic museum, the Chamber of Curiosities, and all these topics which now come up because people with a different cultural background. I know this is also a great problem we can discuss.
Exactly.
The others, so to speak,
Very
the welcomed others, the defined others. They have a different topic. They have a different career, and so there are new topics within or under the roof of globalization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, on your website, which is a remarkable resource of knowledge, there's this question that persistently haunts me ever since I saw it. The question is, shall we forever be contemporary?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's your response to that?
Well, I'm amused because I am old enough to follow for several decades what people think and say and how they define themselves. And I am unfortunately too early with this project to experience the arrival of post-global, for instance. Mm-hmm. Post-contemporary we already have in some.
But what is post-global?
Post-global is something which in economic studies, which in French anthropology already plays a role, namely to emphasize, to reposition oneself in the face of globalization. And this is also something which will happen in the West, that we have somehow to reposition ourselves, and in a local sense, which we touched earlier.
But it's not stepping out of the global condition. You cannot.
No, it is impossible to step out. So it will be post-global. Of course, I like the different weight, the lighter weight of post-global, or postmodern, a term which I never believed, but was a relief for many people to say postmodern is a different modernity, and so post-global will be a different globalization.
All right. Mm-hmm.
But I think global is that also we discussed yesterday evening. Global is the opposite of universal. I mean, this I say as a bold statement.
I think it's fantastic to name it that way, but can you?
Absolutely, because universal is dated, was a concept which one party in the game made for everybody else. So universal, there can be only one concept of art, one art practice, and so on. Now we are, as we say, in a situation where, in my view, we experience a different condition of art making. It's no longer a Western alone a condition. So the condition sets free all kind of new features which are still already, rising, but are not yet fully outlined. So I think globalization, and that we wanted very much to emphasize, is something which has begun, although it is 20 years old, and not yet ended, and is not yet a complete process we can overlook. So also our terminology is lacking, hybrid, post-colonial. And so this terminology we use now for 20 years, and nothing has advanced, nothing has been achieved. McEvely, for instance, beautiful essays in the early 90s, where everything is already there.
Exactly.
But then it became a kind of routine.
So it's get normalized and disciplining and
Yeah.
gets stuck in certain kind of categories.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is inevitable, but will also be a transitional period. But I am therefore very pleased to read the provocation in your contribution to our website, for which we are really very grateful, to rethink contemporary and liberate it from the fashionable, from the routine fashionable, which the self-play, you know. And I think there are many things have to be done. I wonder by whom. If I listen to much of the curator's rhetoric, I lose interest because it's self-satisfying.
Exactly, that's a reason for that kind of provocation, as you called it, to shake the box and try to realize that, and perhaps even I do believe we're in certain sort of transitional moment. In society at this moment, perhaps even comparable to 1989, or maybe it's only now that we feel or we come to terms with the impact of 1989. Maybe it was 2 long decades that we only now understand what 1989 means. And I think in such moments we need to take that responsibility and not to go about with the business as usual.
No, exactly.
And for me, the field, as much as it was a field of possibility, field of contemporary art, a field of possibility in the early 1990s, it over the course of 2 decades became a machine for normalizing and disciplining. There are certain things that are so predictable.
Yeah.
And exactly that provocation to declare the end to the historical period of contemporary art is a provocation to say, hey, really, are we going to move in these circles? That's one question. And second question, indeed, that you just posed, who is going to do it? If we are so self-satisfied with our careers in this field, doing one biennial after the other, publishing one book after the other, that just look alike continuously. And of course this is a very negative view, because of course there's multiplicities of things that are happening around the world, which is remarkable condition, but how do we allow that to challenge our own practices?
Well, I give 2 examples. In Dubai they have the Global Art Forum, and they say art in the business age has to be looked at, and art is business, and they say very bluntly, without shame or anything, they don't see that there is a problem. So there is a lot of business in the contemporary art, which also is a problem for developing a new stance across it. But if we go back to the former West, you know, I shocked, so to speak, the art world when I gave my Munich lecture on the end of art history. And first
very
question
important.
Because what nobody understood at the time, and was only revealed in many translations and so on, was that my point that contemporary art at the time left art history, left the guideline of art history. So Hervé Fischer wrote a book, L'Histoire de l'art est terminée, in which he meant, I do art, I continue to do art, but no longer according to the rules and in the directions of art history. And I mean, this was very interesting. In China, it's very popular because they feel encouraged to join the game when they don't say, I have the rules for you. So it is, there is no discourse self-satisfactory, but it always framed and by a certain time and a certain state of discussion.
What is the role of art in the global world?
I don't know. I mean, I know that art production became general, and I even wonder whether the concept of art can be globalized. It can be produced on a global scale. But what concept of art? I don't know. I mean, when art has been a kind of local idea, then what happens to it when it is spreading everywhere and is becoming a social practice, a kind of business? Especially, I'm interested and encouraged by those countries where art, contemporary art, is the only non-governmental, non-state public activity. For instance, when in Morocco women suddenly started to have exhibitions of their work, this was an outcry. Then suddenly they came out of the shadow and could, in a public place, express their views in a society where everything came up from a center of the state. So I think I'm interested in those cases where art is centered, art is attacked, art is fighting for getting public attention.
So you addressing mainly a notion of self-organization in that respect, as ethics, in a way.
Yes.
But then, how do you translate it into situations like the Netherlands? Because then you talk about art that has for decades been publicly supported very generously, and that era is definitely over, right?
Yes.
Some critics, and even from within the field of art, would refer to it as a state art, right? Now, what is the option left? Where do you go in this kind of circumstances? You go on to the private funding, and you operate in completely different area that has also its own framework and its own limitations.
Sure.
Right? So what is the options? And I do come from Czechoslovakia, where in the 1980s we didn't need state subsidy, we didn't need businessmen buying our artworks, we didn't need art market at the time, and still we were able to produce things in with remarkable value and conviction. Now there's no way to return to living room universities that we were having dissident exhibitions in the cellars and garages. That's not possible. So what's the way out? Are we left with the market in a situation where states are withdrawing public funding?
I have no idea, but the institutional art is both a chance and a problem.
Right.
Institutionalized art is something which in the end cannot go on in an utopian avant-garde way, because it is accepted from the beginning. And I think that among the present categories one can distinguish situations. I cannot speak about the Netherlands. We can speak about situations where we already find institutional art with all the problems you mentioned, and other places where art is fighting for public attention, and where it is rather in the danger of getting under the wings not of state but of private collectors who direct the course of things. This is, I think, in many parts of the world, the bigger problem.
Big issue.
Yeah, much more than state-supported art, because they practically direct the course of things. So art is, of course, in difference to books, something which has to be paid, shown, transported, and that already involves art in all kind of conditions which are not, how should I say, which are not born with art or not art specific, but have become art specific. For instance, in our exhibition, I was astonished to see the whole machinery of transporting, building up, installing all these things. It was a huge enterprise and very expensive, because the whole interaction with these works from far away were really the biggest challenge. I was a little bit defeated. I felt defeated to see how much art is economically based.
the intimate relationship between art and economy is really
Absolutely.
a huge
Absolutely.
issue.
Yes.
But that's also relates to that question about the business as usual. Why do we need to operate only within this kind of business-like, enterprise-like structures?
It's easier to continue.
That's probably true. But still, I have a question, what is the way out?
Yeah, this is also my question, but the answer we have to wait for.
About the notion of exhibition, do you think exhibition is that platform through which we will in the future
I doubt
interact?
I doubt it. In many texts during the last 20 years, I said, what do exhibition halls like museums, what do they do with the audience? The audience just pays entry tickets and looks and leaves. That's all. But that's not enough. You have to somehow engage with the local community, especially since the local community is no longer such local today.
It has changed. We did not realize we still cater to
Absolutely.
remnants of bourgeoisie somehow.
Yeah.
Shocking results of research show that actually average visitor to a museum is a white female above 55. So we did not realize the society changed around us. And I'm currently working on a project trying to understand the future development or speculate about the future possibilities, indeed from the perspective of the public, and try to chart the history of the public through looking at the viewer, consumer, spectator, and a figure that I desire to have in a museum or exhibitions or art spaces. It's a figure of a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, citizen in the most possible open way, so not as an exclusive member of the nation state, but citizen who actually is given agency to act. And that's a bit difficult to imagine what it would be. So it's not about representation, it's about agency. It's not about entertaining consumption, but it's about interacting in a different way with the field of art.
As long as we just tolerate minorities but exclude them from the ritual of art consumption, then nothing has changed.
No, nothing has
but
changed.
when we address them, when we include them, then something will have changed whenever it occurs.
But today, what symbolically or realistically 99% seems to claim has become minority. I think we're in a paradoxal moment in history that we should try to figure out how to harvest. And I doubt museum, art centers, exhibition making is that platform where you can harvest the energy.
Yes, I agree, especially so since the work concept of the white cube has almost been lost in the meanwhile. But we continue exhibition practices which were installed for a different type of exhibition, a different type of artwork, which has a frame and was hanging at a wall. So all this has changed, but interestingly enough, the institutions survive their meaning.
Remarkable. That's absolutely remarkable, which has to do with the DNA of politics around us.
Yes.
But I do still believe that it goes back to the question, what is the role of art?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember actually a wonderful lecture of Terry Smith at the opening of your exhibition in Karlsruhe, where I'm not quite sure whether explicitly, but certainly implicitly talk about art providing an image of the world. And to me, that's that notion of representation that I have big issues with lately. Because if to speak with these terms, I would rather think of art as providing imagination, or offering imagination.
Or taking, getting hold of imaginaries, collective imaginaries.
Exactly.
And we need imaginaries to deal with the world.
And that to me connects to citizenry, to civitas.
Yes, right.
And projects that are appearing more and more, and the question how do you connect artistic imagination, artistic imaginaries to the civic imagination, civic imaginaries. And it might be our task now at this moment.
I fully agree. If I may just add a few words to your question, what is art? How do we define art? This is a question which was on my mind for many times. For instance, I published 20 years ago a book the history of the image prior to the era of art. There was an outcry. You mean in the Middle Ages they had no art? I said, why do they need art? Art was needed in the Renaissance for certain purposes.
Exactly.
Then I wrote the book, The Invisible Masterpiece, where I said, where I tried to show the modern contradiction in a work of art, which was both object and idea. And the idea did not come to the object, and the object not to the idea. So Balzac, already in the 30s of the 19th century, very clearly defined the impasse in defining art, absolute art and all that. And then, of course, we can think that art can be produced, images are by far more produced than art today, that we can arrive in a period where art loses its romantic touch. You know, this something exceptional among the production of pictures.
Exactly.
So the question of what is art cannot be answered in general terms across the times.
Okay.
It is always embedded in my view.
In particular moments in history.
Yes.
So this moment, our moment, you would agree with the imagination or imaginaries rather than image?
Yeah.
I mean, our time is almost over, but I still want to touch in the remarkable achievement of this project, and that was the Histories Room of Histories. I think it has not happened before, that somebody would try to chart the history of last 20 years in this kind of compact way. How did you work on it?
Well, that was a long road to this documentation, and I defended it in the House because at the last moment there was a budget problem for doing this documentation. But I said, please do, otherwise I am no longer part of the exhibition. So we found the money in the last moment. But there again, it was our aim to make the documentation in a way which we call visual, and not just only reading, but see that there are art worlds and their structures and functions which can be made visible in such a room of histories.
It's remarkable, and I wonder what is the future life of these rooms of histories.
Yeah.
Because for various reasons, this is a crucial resource that does not yet exist anywhere else. I wonder, are you working on bringing it into a book? I mean, that's a naive idea and goes slightly counter toward...
No, we are actually faced with this problem. There will be a so-called catalogue which will include the residency artist also, which worked until the exhibition ended, for the exhibition, and as I encouraged them, also against the exhibition. So there will be probably a kind of catalogue handbook published by MIT, where we will try to transfer the documentation rooms to the pages of a book.
First thing that came to my mind when I walked through the rooms of the histories of last 20 years, that to me it had an impact of one of the most remarkable artworks come archives that the most important museum should actually purchase and have on display permanently. Did somebody try?
Wonderful. Yes, there was a discussion in the ZKM, but then there were the necessities to abolish it, to give it up.
That's really a huge achievement, and we at the Former West project really look up into this project, into your project, which has been of crucial importance. And in the exhibition, if it's going to be exhibition, or in an upcoming project that we organize in March in Berlin, we try to chart history of last 20 years slightly differently, where we try to identify so-called documents that might have pass unnoticed by official history writers,
Yeah.
which might be of different sort. It can be a book, it can be a lecture, it can be an artwork, it can be an exhibition, it can be a project. I would like to adopt the global contemporary as one of those documents, as one of those stages that that chart the history of last 20 years differently
Yes.
than is customary.
And what will happen in Berlin?
In Berlin at Haus der Kultur der Welt, we're going to organize something that we called an experimental arrangement, trying to search for a platform that will not be exhibition the way we know it, but a kind of living platform of monologues, dialogues, conversations, exchanges and negotiations between different actors, be it artists, philosophers, exhibitions, lectures, to try to, in a retro perspective way, look back at last 20 years differently than we are accustomed to, but most importantly to speculate about what possibilities there are for us to move beyond what we know as contemporary art.
Okay, will this be a conference or will it be spread?
It's probably going to be a 10-day 10-day term.
Yes.
A term doesn't exist that I would like to use because it won't be an exhibition, it won't be a festival, it won't be a conference. We want to try to find out a format that will collapse all this existent agent of the contemporary art into one whole in a different way.
Oh, yes.
Whether this is going to work out or not, I do not know, but we're trying nonetheless.
Very good.
And I think this is what we learned from trying nonetheless.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
we'll stay in dialogue, please.
Yeah,
let's do that.
Wonderful. Yes.
And as we have these settings, we should now shake hands. No?
Yeah.
Thank you
For the
very
press.
much.
For the press. Thank you, Maria. This was